views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Good evening and welcome to BronxTalk. The Bronx is booming. Many have called the Bronx the last frontier for developers in New York City. But along with that, as many Bronxites know, it's not that easy because gentrification is a reality and some Bronxites could get left behind. And in many cases, development proceeds top down, with Bronx communities and people feeling left out of the process. Into this mix comes Designing the We, a collaborative process that provides for grassroots input into development. We present it tonight in our ongoing quest to open Bronx eyes to the possibilities. Yes, it can be done, and it can be done right. Accordingly, if you want to have input into the dialogue on our program, then send an email to us at BronxTalk@BronxNet.org, a tweet to @BronxTalk, or post it on our Facebook page, and we'll read about it on a future edition of our program. For the here and now, a partner in Designing the We, it is Gregory Jost. Good evening. Welcome back to the program.
Great to be back here, Gary. Thanks.
And the neighborhood organizer, teen program coordinator at the Mary Mitchell Family and Youth Center. She grew up in the neighborhood and can lend credence to the concept of We Design. April Hurley, nice to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Good, thanks for joining us. Gregory, let's start with you before we get into the specifics of what I think is a really exciting project. I know you're excited, you're both excited about it. Mm-hmm. What is Designing the We? And I gave an introduction to the concept, but really, what are we talking about here?
So what we're talking about is how do we bring the world of design and design thinking into the world of development and organizing and community engagement. So what we bring to the table as social impact designers is to say, let's understand how the situation that we're dealing with today. So all the problems that we face in the Bronx around health and housing, crime, policing, et cetera. You can go on and on and on.
You're going to go with youth activities because of the person sitting next to you.
It's all there. To think about, why do we have so many of these kind of big topic issues being problems in the Bronx, right? And to say that actually, we could consider that it's not by accident, but it's actually by design. So now we need to trace back in time and look at some of the big historical systemic forces and say, what was it that contributed to the outcomes that we see now? What was it about the design of those? And we used redlining, which is a practice that was created during the 1930s in the New Deal. That was a national program as part of how the government was going to get into the mortgage market. They assigned levels of risk to neighborhoods all across the country. And specifically in the Bronx, they labeled a lot of neighborhoods as hazardous for investment. Mm-hmm. And those are exactly the same neighborhoods that are facing many of these issues today.
Talk to me about the design that we currently have, okay? So we have some kind of design in the structure of whether it be housing, and I know your background is in housing, and that's what you did for many, many years in the Bronx. Talk to me about those designs and why or how those have contributed to the kinds of problems that you want to address and readdress with new design.
Sure. So first off, the idea was that neighborhoods were going to be redlined, basically cut off for investment, labeled as hazardous for banks to do any kind of business there or insurance companies. And it was mostly based on the racial composition of neighborhoods. So neighborhoods that had any presence of Black or Latino residents, again, this is the late 1930s, were always colored in red and labeled as for disinvestment. Neighborhoods that had more ethnic immigrants who at the time weren't considered white yet. So Italians and, well, what they called Russians, which usually meant Jews.
Jews, right.
And Germans.
Irish?
Even. Irish in the Bronx, not so much because the Irish made all the maps in the Bronx. But in other cities, you'll see that.
Very interesting. And so obviously that kind of, and there are many people who look at social engineering now and look at development and say, even if it's not done exactly with red lines, it's a de facto redlining because of the way neighborhoods are created, the way development, as I addressed at the beginning, is top down. They would say it's kind of still that way.
Well, precisely, Gary, because since that era, then we saw all of these different investments come throughout the country in the post-war boom times, right? With the Federal Housing Administration and the subsidizing of suburbia, and then what happens with urban renewal and slum clearance, and what neighborhoods do they build highways in? What neighborhoods do they build public housing in? Which neighborhoods do they build the civic centers? Where do they cut off access? So during that era of huge public investment, we saw a time where 75% of people across the country who were displaced were people of color, because those were the neighborhoods that had been slated for redlining.
I'm only smiling because when you talk about where did they build the highways, all you have to do is look at the Cross Bronx Expressway and get a lifetime's worth or many lifetimes worth of bad social engineering.
And this is exactly what we did at the Mary Mitchell Center, was to come in and look at this history with the young people and the staff. And their community center and the building that we're looking at developing is only a few blocks from the Cross Bronx.
So now you've done the segue for me. You brought in the Mary Mitchell Center. What is the project that we're going to talk about very specifically? And then, of course, we'll bring April into the discussion.
So the Mary Mitchell Center owns a small, what used to be a 9-unit tenement walk-up building on Mapes Avenue in the Crotona section of the Bronx. And it is the only building left standing on a block that used to be densely packed housing. All the other buildings either burned down or were torn down. And actually community members, many of whom are still connected to the center, organized in the 80s to turn that block into a baseball field.
Excuse me, I think we actually have an overhead shot of that. So, Jayla, if you could pull that up while he's explaining it, that would be really nice.
Yeah, it's helpful to see.
Well, that's not it. That's not the picture we're looking for. We'll get to it.
We'll find the picture. And, but in the middle of center field is this vacant building.
Right.
And, most of the big funding.
That's the picture.
That's
there
it.
We go.
There you can get the overhead view. Now, most of the big funding streams will be, how do we turn this into affordable housing? Which wouldn't be a bad thing to do, but it's also looking at the site and saying, is that an appropriate piece of development to do here? To live in the middle of center field on a baseball field. And
well, we always thought that Babe Ruth was buried out at the monuments at Yankee Stadium, so maybe.
Well,
I'm sorry for interjecting that.
That's no worries. Well, this site is, to think about it in a neighborhood that lost 85 to 90% of its housing stock, right? But much of it's been rebuilt as low density housing. And then we're coming in and thinking, well, do we want to do another 9 units of housing here? Is that what's going to make the difference in the neighborhood that's struggling in many different ways? Right. Or we could start to think about it as a building that does much more.
Okay, April's coming on in a second. Do you or does Mary Mitchell have full control over it? Because in many cases, the property is owned by somebody else, the building is owned by somebody else, or even better or worse, somebody is ready to buy it out and pay for it, and they'll put up who knows what.
So the Mary Mitchell Center has control over the property. Parks owns the land around it, so we have to do some work together with Parks around how the exterior spaces out of the lot line will get developed.
Right. April, let's talk about Mary Mitchell and your work there, and what I'm most interested in is the young people. So talk to me about the Teen Center and the young people who are involved in this project.
So when I started working at the Mary Mitchell Center a year ago, the youth were already in the process of working with the board of Mary Mitchell and the staff of Mary Mitchell, organizing a community to engage them around the Austin Jacobo Center and the redevelopment project.
Okay, you've already named it. He didn't name it, so it's the Austin Jacobo.
Yeah.
I wanted to pronounce that right. Okay. And so they were already engaged and already involved in it.
They were already engaged in this process. I joined them right after they had done a training called the Social Determinants of Health, in which they identified the Austin Jacobo Field as an underutilized resource in their community. And they began, and during that process, that's how Designing the We came, because we needed a partner that would be able to engage the community in visualizing their dreams of how we wanted to be leaders and agents of change in our community.
Many people believe that young people in the Bronx are disenfranchised, they don't care, they're not involved. Have you found it to be a struggle to have them be part of this, or do you find that, when you deal, and I know you're dealing with young teenagers, that they really are involved and interested?
Well, the Mary Mitchell Center is a special place because everyone has a connection to the past at the center, and it definitely is a place where you feel empowered. So
Even the young people?
Even the young people. The Mary Mitchell Center has a close connection with our elected officials. So when you see your elected officials, it changes you. It changes how you feel like, okay, maybe this thing can work.
Right, they're not on TV. There's somebody there who's standing up and saying, I personally am going to help you and I'm going to support you.
Yeah, and the staff is personally encouraging you to push them, to ask them for support. So it changes.
What I really like about this, and when Gregory mentioned it to me, that G made, we were interacting about maybe we should do a show. I love this idea of all the elements working together. We've had so much in this borough where, whether it's elected officials or young people or a community center, and they're all in different places. This to me is what I said at the top of the show. It can be done if it's done well. So what have you tried to do to get them involved and to get them to see what they could envision in this, in like a free building, which we rarely get?
So we met every Friday for about 6 to 8 weeks with Designing the We, and at the beginning we went through the history of the Bronx, sort of to give us a backdrop about why this should be important to us. But a part of that process was to talk to the elders in our personal lives and to get them to talk about what was it like in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s in the Bronx. And we were able to connect some of the stories that we see with the policies that he spoke about earlier about redlining. And for instance, when I grew up, I saw a lot of stray dogs, or a lot of, not that many vacant lots, but a lot of stray dogs. And throughout his process, he had us talking to our elders, and one of the elders brought up that in the 80s and 90s, there were a lot of vacant lots, and there were even more stray dogs, and she actually got chased home one day by a pack of stray dogs.
Oh my goodness.
And the conversation started about disinvestment. And I was able to connect like her disinvestment, her actual vision, or like how she experienced the disinvestment in the Bronx, to my reality of like seeing stray dogs growing up, to
the reality today, and how we're going to change it so that never happens. That sort of thing never happens. What is just an eye opener right now and fascinating to me. In a way, we're dealing with 3 generations. You're dealing with people younger than you.
Yes.
We're talking about you who grew up, at a different period of time, and then of course Gregory, you and others, maybe a little more senior, who have a little deeper memory, and bringing these generations together, frankly, is very exciting.
And that was actually one of the key components that came out of this.
Well, it's the first thing she mentioned.
Exactly.
Without me prodding for it, it was the first thing she
all
brought
of the young people and all of the staff said, we need an intergenerational space. And what they want it to do is to allow the elders in their community to act as teachers and mentors to younger folks, specifically around learning new skills, trade skills. For instance, that's why we're talking about having a maker space in the basement.
A what?
Maker space.
Maker.
A maker.
M-A-K-E-R?
M-A-K-E-R.
A maker space.
A space where you make things with with some old technology and some new technology, 3D printers, different types of laser cutters, where you could do.
Amazingly exciting to me. I'm sorry. I'm listening and I'm incredibly motivated. Go ahead.
And exactly, it is totally exciting because there's the idea that not only can you use your creativity, and this is what the kids said, by the way, they want to be able to use their creativity, and they want to be able to create something that's worth something that has value out of something that doesn't have value. So whether that's like upcycling or recycling garbage or waste, or just something out of their imaginations.
But you see, and again, I'm kind of an objective listener, and maybe our viewers feel the same way. You can see how young people who grew up and heard the stories of the dogs and know what they've seen in their own neighborhood, and they said in their minds, if I'm given the opportunity, I want to make something. I want it to be positive. And so that's what they brought to the table. I do want to take one step back and talk to me about the process. So we've established what's out there. We've established a little bit about some of the resource. And you've already alluded to some of the things we're getting to.
Yeah.
But what is that process? Like how did that work? She talked about meeting every Friday. Who was there? How did that work? What did you and others, I presume, from Designing the We put on? Give me the whole thing.
Yeah, so there were 3 of us from Designing the We who came in, myself and April DeSimone and Braden Crooks, who are the 2 co-founders. And we came in and implemented the curriculum where we were, in addition to looking at this history, working with the kids to identify who were elders that they could go out and interview, get them involved in the research themselves.
So they went and interviewed elders.
Yeah, whether it was their parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, teachers.
Oh, how exciting, how wonderful.
After they got a little bit of this backstory, so exactly what April was talking about. So now you've got a little bit of framing, you can ask all different kinds of questions once you have a little bit of context.
I have to ask, of course, I'm very interested in interviewing for some obvious reasons. What was that like? So young people would just go home and you'd send them out, or you'd send them with a tape recorder, or they would do it pad and pen, or like, how did you set them up to do that interview?
So
or those interviews?
I believe they gave us a list of questions, but we were open to ask whatever questions we want. And before we went out, we thought about the type of people we wanted to interview. And we did target, different people. We didn't just go to our moms and dads. Some of our moms were in the audience, so we couldn't go to their moms.
Wrong.
But so I interviewed my pastor. People interviewed the principal of a local high school,
and the
community
kids
board
themselves
members.
Selected who they thought would be a good interview.
Based on their position in the society.
And what kinds of things did you get out, or did the young people, of course, get out of that, those conversations that were really usable in the process? Any good ones? I mean, maybe Gregory can pitch in there some things that you
L.
Right. So one thing we
about
you want to talk about the Third Avenue L? I mean, I'll just introduce the topic. Was one thing we talked about. Why was that neighborhood developed where it was developed and how it was developed in the first place, and why was that the oldest housing stock in the Bronx? Because it was right near the Third Avenue L,
Right.
which was the oldest train line into the Bronx.
Of course.
And those were the neighborhoods that were actually all redlined.
Right.
And,
And we know, listen, for people who want to understand the development of the Bronx, and this is a very short history lesson, they developed around our train lines. That
Exactly.
is, of course, how neighborhoods developed.
They developed, right, because the private developer saw where is their public investment, here comes the subway line, all the infrastructure that's being built out, boom, here you go, everything's going to get built up.
April, did you see changes in the young people themselves through this process? I mean, listen, we're talking about how we're going to develop something, but I'm also very concerned about young people, that if they participate, that they grow and learn and develop. Talk to me about, you don't have to say names, but some of the young people and what you saw in them as they went through this process.
I definitely think when they brought to us the idea, I had heard it once, but it never really clicked that there was an entire train station, subway that was in the Bronx that
This
up
is
and
really the bridge
disappeared.
of those generations that I talked about. I love this.
So when they
So you learned something too.
Yeah, and I had heard about it once, but it was like, okay, and I never really thought about it again. But then when they said it, and then when they showed us pictures, even the young people and we began to be like, I want to know what else did they take away? Like it just changed us, and we were eager to actually go out and to do those interviews because we wanted to know what our elders had to say about how things were.
We didn't clarify. I presumed that the students were like, let's say, I don't know, 8th or 9th grade through high school? Or
Yes.
I was just guessing that those were the young people. So I guess, Gregory, we're up to you to tell us where we are at in the process and what we're getting. And I say we in the Bronx. We is the right word.
Right.
What we are getting or what we will be getting. Give us an update of where we're at.
So the other ideas that came out of this, and I just want to emphasize that part of the process is having the young people and the staff, the folks in the community, own the process, right? So whatever comes out of it is something that they're really, they have a sense that, this is going to win because we're going to make it win. and it's up to us to make this happen.
Well, that energy has come out of everything that April
I
has
know,
said.
it's very present, and that's what we call our undesigned work, because it's actually addressing what was missing for all those other decades, is that people in the communities didn't have a voice over how development in their neighborhoods would happen. So when we approach the kids with these different ideas and let them brainstorm a little bit and show some different examples, in addition to having this kind of apprenticeship in a makerspace, there's going to be a shared community kitchen and
Okay,
cook
so wait,
space.
how many floors?
5 floors.
5 floors,
Right, plus the basement
plus a basement, okay,
and a roof.
and a roof.
So we're extending it all out in all different
Oh,
directions.
all of a sudden my wheels are turning
maximizing-
too on the roof.
Maximizing the space, right? It's not a
Okay,
huge building.
so we have the maker space
in the
bottom.
basement. The first floor and the second floor is a shared commercial kitchen and a restaurant hall that can also be rented out.
A commercial kitchen, as in.
You can incubate small businesses around food. Just like in the makerspace.
I'm well aware, sure.
Just like in the makerspace, you can launch your different businesses, have them be collaborative or cooperative. Same idea in the cook space.
So there would be a cook space now. You mentioned like restaurant or catering hall, or so that people could have events or things like that.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then on the upper floor is some other classroom space and a recording studio.
Oh, gee whiz.
We found, and this is it, we're approaching it from the model that, look, there's so much value in this community, and when we bring people together, we can co-generate shared value beyond it, and use this as a hub for what we call ecosystem development. So thinking about how do we create the opportunity to spur off all these different enterprises and businesses that will simultaneously provide services, but not have it be the primary goal to provide a service. Like that just happens.
Then the primary goal is
To link people together cooperatively, collaboratively.
to have a healthy community, and it would be nice if it is productive, but you're saying that is the secondary goal.
No, when I say it's going to be productive, it has to be productive.
Of course.
What I'm saying is that generating services out of it, like that there's services for people in the community, is a natural byproduct of that.
Right. April, let's just talk about these things that came about. Again, I'm so interested in the young people. So they suggested these. I could see, of course, how they wanted a recording studio, but they came up, or ultimately came to the idea of you say of culinary kitchens and things like that. Talk to me about their enthusiasm for those kind, like what the dialogues were like, what the conversations were like. Give me some of that.
So it was a little bit competitive.
Competitive?
It was a little competitive.
And there were how many young people involved?
15 young. The youth council was comprised of 15 youth, and then there was staff and board members. And
Right.
so each team was intergenerational. We broke up into 3 groups, and in our as a collective, we watched different videos of projects that were already going on, both in the United States and outside of the United States, of these types of projects. And then we each took notes about what we wanted to do.
And the kids, of course, also said, "Ooh, I like that idea." Gregory, there is a reality here. We know that community centers aren't blessed with endless budgets, and of course now a lot of questions are being asked about budgets that might be coming down from the top. A recording studio is going to cost something. A maker space is going to cost something. Right. Kitchens are going to cost something. Yeah. Where is that process at? Because undoubtedly there is going to need to be a reality.
Exactly. So what we're talking about right now is looking for upfront investment in the center, right? And not looking to create something that needs ongoing grants to sustain it over time, because what we'll be creating are these, again, inside the hub, that each of these, as a cooperatively owned space, has member ownerships that pay dues.
And self-propagating in some way.
And the businesses
but there is going to be
it.
some
Upfront,
infrastructure.
exactly. Yeah. And that's the point where we're at now, is raising those funds from investors, and also looking at local elected officials who are pledging support to make this a reality.
How much money is involved? Do we know that at this point?
So the estimate...
Wait, one step back before I ask you that question. The planning is all done?
Well, no, we're not. It's not complete. It's not completed. We're in the midst.
Close.
Yeah, we've got architectural drawings. We're just finishing out some of the sketches, and we're looking at some of the financing pieces of it to make sure that this is all a go.
Do you have a dollar amount in the back of your mind?
So most likely it's going to be somewhere around $8 million.
$8 million.
To develop up front. Which, in the grand scheme of things,
I was about to
not
say,
that much money.
in the scheme of things, it's not. And you're hopeful that we can figure this out.
Yeah,
Of course.
entirely. I mean, this is the thing, is that we go out and talk to folks and they get excited about the idea and the model of it. And part of what we're doing here is around these the ecosystem hubs, that this is a thing that a lot of people get excited about from a lot of different angles. And so bringing those folks together, saying like, look, we need to design and create programs or funding mechanisms that are going to allow these to flourish and expand and pop up in all different neighborhoods.
April, this is maybe the most important question of the whole dialogue that we've had. And it's really what I said at the top. And the reason that I was excited when Gregory mentioned it to me, and the reason I'm even more excited now after hearing it, is that this is one example of the possibilities. Can this be duplicated in other places? I mean, are we, and what is it going to take so that some of the frustration I mentioned at the top of the show is, we can put that aside and really start to visualize and realize? I mean, do you have a thought on that?
Yeah, I definitely think it can be duplicated. It begins with the community being empowered to take ownership of their space and then being linked with a partner like Designing the We.
Mm-hmm. Like I'm thinking about, and goodness gracious, we're almost out of time. And there's a space down in the South Bronx, and there was a lot of dialogue about this old building and what to do with it. And it was involved in a development project. Be nice to have this kind of collaborative process, especially with young people driving the energy of it. And so again, that's why I presented it in this way tonight, because we're always trying to give people of the Bronx, wow, maybe my neighborhood, or maybe we can do it with our community center or something. And maybe they won't be as blessed. One of the key elements was you had the building. Maybe you don't have that, but maybe there's a way to envision other spaces.
Exactly.
Like that. Do you have other projects in mind in the Bronx before we run out of time?
Yeah, we're talking to a number of folks. We have our exhibit up and have been engaging with people around the Andrew Friedman home.
Wow, that would be another example
There's
of
so much potential.
Something.
And there's
sitting there.
so many amazing folks in that building already.
Gregory Jost, thank you so much. Thank you for the work that you're doing. April Hurley, thank you for you and for the Mary Mitchell Community Center, one of the best places in the Bronx, and for the vision. Vision, it's all about vision. We got to have it in the Bronx, and we appreciate your time tonight.
And thanks so much for letting us come on. And
Yeah.
We're
Maybe you'll invite me to the ribbon cutting. We'll have a great time.
Of course.
Folks, if you have further questions or comments on anything you heard on tonight's show or anything going on in the Bronx, then email them to us at BronxTalk@BronxNet.org. Send us a tweet at BronxTalk and post them on our Facebook page, and we'll read them on the air during a future edition of our program. We ask you to like the Bronx Talk Facebook page. You can follow us on Twitter, and you can check out our archives at BronxNet.org. You'll find Bronx Talk on the lower right navigation bar. Now, next week, more development as we look to the Mott Haven Historic District, and we talk about how to develop the Bronx while keeping our historic resources intact. And that should be yet another of this type of dialogue, envisioning the Bronx as a better place than it is. Thanks to producer Jayla Jabetis and to director Brianna Roller, and to our cast of thousands, to our guests, and we'll see you next week.